Dr. Amelia Crane was not your average scientist. She had this insatiable curiosity about how fear works, why it grips us, why it lingers, and why some people seem to crave it. Her latest obsession? Creepypastas. You know, those short, spine-chilling stories lurking on the internet. Why do they scare us so much? What is it about them that makes people lose sleep? Amelia's research took her to the darkest corners of the web, places where these stories weren't just read, they were lived. One night, her search led her to a locked forum, the kind of place you only find if you're already in too deep. The posts there weren't just stories, they were warnings. People talked about the things they'd seen, shadows moving in empty rooms, cold whispers when no one else was there. And then she saw it. A post titled, "The story only ends when you stop reading." It wasn't just the title that grabbed her. It was the way the words seemed to pulse on the screen, as if they were alive. Her heartbeat quickened. Should she open it? Every rational part of her screamed, no, but Amelia had never been great at listening to her instincts. That's where it all began. A single click, a single story, and the kind of fear you can't escape. Amelia sat in the dim glow of her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her curiosity was a monster of its own, always whispering just a little further. Ignoring the knot tightening in her stomach, she typed in the password she'd pieced together from cryptic clues scattered across the forum. The page flickered, twice. When it finally loaded, a single message filled the screen. You have been chosen. Are you ready to see the truth? Below the message was a link to a file, ShadowReader.xlsx. She hesitated, staring at the file as if it could stare back. Then, as if in a trance, she clicked. The download started instantly, the progress bar crawling across the screen. Later that night, Amelia opened the file. It was a story, a disturbingly detailed story about a woman who found herself haunted after reading a cursed manuscript. The descriptions were vivid, unsettlingly so. The woman's home was described with eerie precision. The creaky floorboards, the cracked paint on the window frame, even the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Amelia froze. This was her house. Her pulse quickened as she scrolled. The story began to mirror her life in other ways. It described her daily routine, her research, even the coffee mug she always left on her desk. The final line sent chills down her spine. Once you finish this, you're part of the story now. Amelia tried to laugh it off as a bizarre coincidence. It was just a story, after all. But that night, the scratching noises began. Faint at first, like mice in the walls. Then came the cold spots, freezing pockets of air that seemed to follow her through the house. And then, the shadow. She first noticed it in her peripheral vision, flickering just out of view. When she turned, there was nothing there. But every time, it seemed to be getting closer. Amelia couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. The scratching noises had become a nightly occurrence. The cold spots never left. And the shadow, it wasn't her imagination anymore. It was real. She knew it was real. To keep herself grounded, she decided to document everything. She called it research, but deep down, she knew it was her way of convincing herself that she wasn't losing her mind. She set up cameras in her home, recording every room, every corner. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual, just her pacing the kitchen late at night, the glow of her laptop in the living room, and her restless movements in bed. Then she reviewed the footage from the third night. Her hands trembled, as she watched. There it was, in the corner of the living room, a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light or a glitch in the video. It was unmistakably a figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing just outside the camera's range. She rewound the footage over and over, hoping it was just her eyes playing tricks on her. But no, it was there. And worse, it moved. The shadow wasn't stationary. As the hours passed, it edged closer. It didn't walk or glide. It simply shifted, almost as if the camera had caught it in mid-step between frames. By the end of the footage, it was standing directly behind her. Amelia's breath hitched as she realized something chilling. She hadn't noticed it in real life. She hadn't felt it. Determined to prove to herself that this was all just in her head, she brought the footage to her colleagues at the university. But the response wasn't what she expected. They brushed it off, claiming it was an artifact of poor lighting or faulty equipment. Even her closest friend in the department, Dr. Patel, looked at her with thinly veiled concern. "Maybe you've been pushing yourself too hard," he said gently. "Fear can do strange things to the mind." Amelia nodded, but she didn't believe him. She couldn't. The evidence was right there, staring back at her from the screen. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, she made a decision. She needed answers. She returned to the forum, desperate for any information that could explain what was happening. But when she navigated back to the thread where she'd found the file, it was gone. In its place was a new post. Her blood ran cold as she read the title. "Welcome, Amelia." The post contained only one sentence. "You've read the story. Now it's reading you." Below it, her reflection flickered on the screen. It wasn't her own. Amelia's life began to unravel, each day a waking nightmare that blurred the lines between reality and illusion. The shadow that had haunted her videos was no longer confined to the screen. It had found its way into her home, appearing in mirrors, windows, and even in her dreams. Each time she saw it, her heart would pound in terror. It was closer, always closer. Desperate to regain control, Amelia tried to destroy the ShadowReader file. She deleted it from her computer, emptied the recycle bin, and even wiped her hard drive. But every time she turned her laptop back on, the file was there, sitting innocently on the desktop, as if nothing had happened. It was mocking her. When smashing her laptop in a fit of frustration didn't stop it, the story began to show up in new places. It appeared on her phone, her tablet, and even in handwritten notes scattered around her apartment. She was certain she hadn't written them, but the words matched the story she had read to the last letter. Then the haunting escalated. One night, she woke to find her bedroom walls covered in thick black writing. The words of the story were scrawled everywhere, on the ceiling, the furniture, even her bed sheets. They glistened as if freshly inked. Trembling, she touched the writing. It was wet. Her breathing quickened as she realized she wasn't alone. The room felt colder, heavier, as if the air itself was pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed, the sound cutting through the oppressive silence like a knife. The screen displayed an unknown number. Hands shaking, she answered the call. There was static at first, a low, grating hum that made her wince. Then through the static came a voice, distorted, cold, and dripping with malice. It whispered slowly, each word dragging her deeper into despair. "You've finished the story. Now it finishes you." Amelia's apartment was silent when the neighbors reported her missing. They hadn't seen her in days, and the strange sounds, scratching, whispers, and low hums had stopped completely. When the authorities finally entered, they found her apartment in shambles. The walls, furniture, and even the floors were covered in a chaotic web of black writing. Words looped endlessly, spiraling inward toward the center of the room, where Amelia's research journal lay open. Her final entry was written in jagged, uneven handwriting. The shadow isn't a story, it's a mirror. And it's coming for you next. The ShadowReader file was nowhere to be found on her devices. Yet, in the days that followed, it began appearing online. People shared it on forums, sent it in email chains, and posted about it on social media. It was dismissed by most as an elaborate hoax. But for those who dared to open it, the nightmare became real. One man claimed he saw a figure standing in the corner of his room after finishing the story. Another woman reported hearing faint scratching noises coming from her walls, growing louder each night. A teenager woke to find the words of the story scrawled across his bedroom ceiling, dripping with a black, tar-like substance. Soon, the disappearances began. The people who had read the file started vanishing without a trace. Their homes would be left in disarray, the words of the ShadowReader etched into every surface, just like Amelia's apartment. The file's final lines were always the same. You've read the story. Now it's reading you. How far will you go to uncover the truth? And so, the ShadowReader continues to spread, claiming new victims with every download, every click, every curious mind that dares to wander too far. The question now is simple. Will you be next? The ShadowReader file had become an urban legend, whispered about in dark corners of the internet. Some people dismissed it as a hoax. Others treated it like a challenge, daring their friends to read it. But those who clicked on the file quickly realized that it wasn't just a story. It was something far more sinister. A group of college students decided to investigate the phenomenon. They had seen posts about the file on a deep web forum and thought it would make for a thrilling project for their paranormal podcast. Armed with cameras, voice recorders, and a bravado born of ignorance, they downloaded the file and read it aloud on a live stream. At first, nothing happened. The story seemed like any other creepypasta, eerie but harmless. The students laughed, making jokes about how people must have scared themselves into imagining the haunting effects. But as the night wore on, their laughter faded. One by one, they began noticing strange occurrences. The lights in their studio flickered, the air turned icy, and faint scratching sounds echoed through the walls. The cameras they had set up captured fleeting shadows moving behind them. But when they turned to look, the room was empty. The live stream audience grew restless, commenting on the shadows and the strange behavior of the students. One viewer wrote, "There's something behind you." Another said, "Did anyone else hear that whisper?" Panic set in when one of the students, Sarah, froze mid-sentence. Her eyes widened, fixed on a dark corner of the room. "It's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could react, the lights went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. The live stream continued, but the screen showed only static. Distorted audio, laughter, whispers, and what sounded like faint screaming leaked through the speakers. When the authorities arrived the next morning, the studio was empty. All the students were gone. The only thing left behind was a laptop, its screen displaying a single line of text. "You've read the story. Now it's reading you." The ShadowReader's legend grew, spreading beyond the internet. People began reporting strange sightings in their homes, shadows that shouldn't exist, whispers when no one else was around. Entire families disappeared, leaving behind homes covered in scrawled words and symbols. The pattern was clear. The file wasn't just a story, it was a doorway. Each reader became a vessel, carrying the curse forward, spreading it like a virus. And the shadow? It wasn't satisfied with simply haunting its victims. It wanted more. It needed more. Even now, the file waits. It waits for someone curious enough, brave enough, or foolish enough to open it. The question remains, will you be the one to break the cycle, or will you let it continue? The shadow is always watching, always waiting. Not everyone who encountered the ShadowReader file vanished. A few managed to escape, barely, but their lives were never the same. Among them was Marcus Kane, a former cybersecurity expert turned recluse. His encounter with the file left him scarred, both mentally and physically. Now he lived in isolation, his every move shadowed by paranoia and guilt. Marcus had stumbled upon the ShadowReader file during a routine deep web security sweep. Unlike most, he hadn't finished reading it. Halfway through the story, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something was watching him from the screen. He slammed his laptop shut, but by then, it was too late. The shadow had already marked him. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, fleeting shadows, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. But Marcus was no ordinary victim. He was a hacker, and he believed that if the file was man-made, then it could be destroyed. The question was, how? Marcus tracked every thread, every forum post, and every rumor about the ShadowReader. He discovered patterns, clues hidden within the text. The file wasn't just a story, it was a program, an intricate piece of code that seemed to evolve with every person who opened it. Its origins were unknown, but its purpose was clear: to spread fear and claim its readers. But there was a glimmer of hope. Deep within the file's code was a failsafe, a back door hidden by whoever or whatever created it. Marcus realized that if he could access the back door, he might be able to stop the file from spreading. However, doing so meant reopening the file and finishing the story, a risk he wasn't sure he could take. One stormy night, Marcus sat in front of his laptop, the ShadowReader file glowing ominously on the screen. The air in the room felt heavy, almost alive. He took a deep breath, his fingers trembling as he clicked on the file. The words unfolded before him, darker and more vivid than he remembered. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, each sentence dragging him deeper into the story. The shadow returned, appearing in the corners of his room, growing larger and more defined with every passing minute. Its presence was suffocating, but Marcus kept going. Sweat dripped down his face as he reached the final paragraph. The screen flickered, the text distorting into symbols and static. He typed furiously, breaking through the layers of code that shielded the back door. The room grew colder, the shadow now looming behind him. Its hollow eyes bored into the back of his head, but Marcus didn't dare turn around. "Almost there," he whispered to himself, his voice shaking. Just as the shadow reached for him, Marcus hit the final command. The screen went black, and the room fell silent. The presence vanished, leaving Marcus gasping for air. He had done it, or so he thought. Days turned into weeks, and the ShadowReader file seemed to disappear from the internet. Forums fell silent, the strange disappearances stopped, and Marcus dared to believe he had succeeded. But deep down, he felt uneasy. The shadow had disappeared from his life, but its memory lingered like a dark stain on his soul. One night, as he lay in bed, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. You broke the story. But did you break the mirror? Before he could react, the lights in his room flickered, and a faint scratching sound echoed from the walls. Marcus sat up, his heart pounding as he stared at the screen. The ShadowReader file wasn't gone. It had only been waiting for the right moment to return. And this time, it wouldn't be stopped. The ShadowReader file had become more than just an urban legend. It was an entity, a living, breathing virus feeding on fear, growing stronger with each victim. The more people read it, the more powerful it became. And now, it had found a way to spread faster than ever before. Social media platforms were flooded with whispers about the file. Influencers dared their followers to open it. Online forums exploded with debates about its authenticity. Some dismissed it as a hoax, while others insisted it was real. But those who downloaded the file found themselves drawn into a darkness they could never escape. Across the globe, strange incidents began to occur. A woman in Tokyo reported waking up to find her mirrors shattered. The words, "It's watching you," etched into the glass. In London, a family vanished overnight, leaving behind a house filled with cryptic writing and faint bloodstains. In New York, a young man live-streamed his descent into madness after reading the file. Viewers watched in horror as the lights in his room flickered, shadows moved behind him, and his screams abruptly cut off. The screen went dark, and he was never seen again. Governments took notice. Cybersecurity agencies scrambled to contain the file, declaring it a national threat. But every time they managed to take it down, it reappeared in new forms, embedded in emails, hidden in QR codes, even whispered in audio files. The ShadowReader was no longer just a file. It had become an unstoppable force. Among the chaos, a hacker group known as Eclipse emerged. They claimed to have discovered the source of the ShadowReader, a server buried deep within the dark web. The group's leader, known only as Ghost, released a statement. "This isn't a story, it's a doorway. And if we don't shut it, it will consume us all." Eclipse launched an operation to trace the file's origins. They found themselves navigating a labyrinth of encrypted servers, each more corrupted than the last. The deeper they went, the more their systems glitched. Their screens filled with images of hollow-eyed figures and distorted whispers that made their ears bleed. Members of the group began to disappear, their usernames replaced by a single message. The story doesn't end. It evolves. Ghost, the last surviving member, live-streamed his final attempt to shut down the ShadowReader. Viewers watched as he entered the server's core, a digital void filled with shifting symbols and static. He spoke calmly at first, explaining his plan to destroy the source. But as he typed the final command, his expression changed. His voice trembled as he whispered, "It's here." The screen flickered, revealing a shadowed figure standing behind Ghost. The feed cut to static, and his stream ended. When authorities raided his location, the room was empty. All that remained was a single message on his monitor. "You can't stop the story. You are the story." Now the ShadowReader is everywhere. No device is safe, no person untouchable. It has become a digital plague, spreading faster than anyone can contain. The more people try to fight it, the stronger it becomes. And as you read this, It's already watching you.